Hey everyone, welcome back to Senior Balance Hub. Today I'm going to tell you something that might make you uncomfortable. I'm going to share the parts of living alone after 60 that nobody talks about in those cheerful Embrace Your Independence articles. I've been living alone for 10 years now, since I was 62. And while there have been beautiful moments and real growth, there's another side to this story that I think you deserve to hear. The side that's messier, scarier, and more complicated than anyone wants to admit. If you're living alone, considering it, or you're worried about someone you love, please stay with me. Because the truth is, nobody prepared me for what this decade would actually look like. Let me start with something that happened last Tuesday. I was carrying groceries up my front steps when I missed the top step and went down hard. Really hard. For about 30 seconds, lying there with my knee throbbing and my pride bruised, I had one terrifying thought: what if I can't get up? What if this is how they find me? That's the reality no one talks about when they're celebrating your newfound freedom. When you live alone at our age, every stumble, every chest pain, every moment of dizziness carries weight that it didn't when you were younger or when someone else was around to notice if you didn't come to breakfast. I did get up, by the way. Limped inside, iced my knee, and went on with my day. But that moment of vulnerability, that flash of what if, it stays with you in a way that changes how you move through the world. Let's talk about health, because this is where living alone gets really complicated after 60. I don't mean the obvious stuff, having someone to drive you to appointments or help you remember medications. I mean the subtle, insidious ways that isolation affects your physical well-being. 3 years ago, I developed what I thought was a persistent cough. Nothing dramatic, just this annoying little cough that wouldn't go away. If I'd been living with someone, they would have said something after the first week. That cough is getting worse. You should see a doctor. But when you live alone, you become your own baseline. That cough just became part of my normal. By the time I finally saw a doctor, after 2 months of dismissing it, I had walking pneumonia. The doctor asked why I'd waited so long, and I didn't have a good answer. Because when there's no one else listening to your body with you, you stop hearing the changes yourself. This happens more than I want to admit. The slow weight loss that might signal something serious, but you rationalize it because your clothes fit better. The increasing forgetfulness that might be worth investigating, but you blame it on stress or age. The social withdrawal that might indicate depression, but feels like simply preferring your own company. When you're the only witness to your own decline, it's remarkably easy to normalize things that shouldn't be normal. Here's something else nobody tells you: the social isolation isn't just about being alone. It's about becoming irrelevant to other people's daily lives in ways that are both subtle and devastating. I have wonderful friends. I really do. But when you don't have a built-in social unit, a spouse, partner, or family at home, you become optional in a way that's hard to explain. Dinner invitations become less frequent because you're the odd number at the table. Holiday gatherings shift to accommodate couples and families, and suddenly you're the afterthought invitation, the "oh, we should probably ask Sarah too." Last Christmas, I realized I hadn't had a single unplanned visitor in over 8 months. Think about that. 8 months without someone just dropping by, calling to say they were in the neighborhood, or stopping over to share a cup of coffee. Every social interaction I had was scheduled, planned, and initiated by me reaching out. There's this gradual shift where you go from being woven into the fabric of other people's lives to being someone they remember to include. And the difference between those two things is the difference between belonging and being accommodated. Nobody prepared me for the financial anxiety that comes with being the only person responsible for everything. And I don't mean the obvious expenses, though yes, carrying a mortgage, utilities, and maintenance costs on one income is challenging. I mean the deeper financial fear that keeps you up at night. When the furnace started making strange noises 2 winters ago, I knew it needed attention. But I also knew that a new furnace could cost $8,000, and I was the only person making that decision, bearing that cost, living with the consequences of being wrong. There's no one to share the burden of financial catastrophe, no second income to fall back on, no partner to brainstorm solutions with. I've become hypervigilant about money in ways that probably aren't healthy. I second-guess purchases that I could easily afford because I'm terrified of depleting resources I might need for an emergency. That bottle of wine that would have been a spontaneous treat 10 years ago now requires mental calculations about whether it's a wise use of money. The car repair estimate that would have been an annoying inconvenience when shared becomes a genuine source of stress when you're carrying it alone. Home maintenance isn't just about keeping your space nice, it's about protecting the only asset you have, with no backup plan if something goes catastrophically wrong. This brings me to something that haunts me more than I like to admit: the emergency scenarios that play out in my head. Not the dramatic ones, heart attacks or accidents, but the mundane emergencies that could become life-threatening when you're alone. What if I fall in the shower and can't get up? I've installed grab bars and a shower seat, but the fear remains. What if I have a reaction to medication and become disoriented? What if there's a power outage during a winter storm and I can't get help? I have systems now. I check in with neighbors, I have medical alert devices, I keep emergency supplies. But the weight of being your own safety net, your own first responder, your own backup plan, that's a psychological burden that accumulates over time. 2 years ago, during a particularly bad ice storm, I lost power for 4 days. I was prepared with batteries, canned food, and blankets. But on day 3, sitting in my cold, dark house, I had a moment of genuine panic about what would happen if this lasted longer. Not because I wasn't prepared, but because I was the only one who would know if I wasn't okay. Here's something that's been harder to articulate: living alone for a decade has changed who I am in ways I didn't expect. When there's no daily witness to your life, no one reflecting your personality back to you, you start to lose pieces of yourself. I used to be funny. I had this quick wit that friends loved, this ability to find humor in difficult situations. But humor is interactive. It needs an audience, a response, someone to appreciate the joke. After years of keeping my observations to myself, I realized I'd stopped being funny, even when I was with other people. The muscle had atrophied from lack of use. I used to be a storyteller. I loved sharing the small adventures of my day, the interesting people I'd met, the funny things I'd observed. But stories need listeners, and when you live alone, most of your experiences happen in solitude. By the time you see someone to share them with, the stories feel stale, less significant. There's a social skill erosion that happens when most of your interactions are brief and surface level: the grocery store clerk, the bank teller, the neighbor walking their dog. You lose the ability to engage in the kind of deep, meandering conversations that happen naturally when you share daily life with someone. One of the most profound aspects of living alone at this stage of life is what I call the silence of no witness. Your daily life becomes unwitnessed in ways that make you question your own significance. When I accomplish something, finish a challenging project, solve a problem, have a moment of genuine joy, there's no one to share it with immediately. By the time I have the opportunity to tell someone, the moment has passed, and the telling feels hollow compared to the sharing that happens in real time. When I'm struggling, feeling sad, worried, or overwhelmed, there's no natural way for that to be acknowledged or supported. I've become skilled at managing my emotional life in isolation, but that skill comes at a cost. You become so good at handling things alone that you forget how to let others help, even when help is available. I realized last year that I'd started talking to myself, not just thinking out loud, but having actual conversations with myself as if I were two different people. It wasn't a sign of mental decline, it was my brain's attempt to create the interactive dialogue that I was missing in my daily life. Let me tell you about something that happened 6 months ago that illustrates a challenge I never anticipated: medical advocacy when you're alone. I went to the emergency room with what turned out to be a kidney stone. The pain was excruciating, I was scared, and I was given multiple medications and instructions while I was in distress. In the old days, I would have had someone with me to ask the right questions, remember the instructions, and help me make decisions about treatment. Instead, I was trying to process medical information while in severe pain, trying to remember medication names and dosages, trying to advocate for myself with healthcare providers who were clearly overwhelmed and rushing through their explanations. When you're 60 plus and dealing with health issues, the absence of a person who knows your medical history, your preferences, and your fears becomes a real disadvantage in healthcare settings. Nurses and doctors often assume there's someone at home to help with post-treatment care, to monitor recovery, to notice if something's wrong. The discharge paperwork said to have someone watch you for signs of complications. The prescription required pickup within 2 hours. The follow-up instructions assumed someone would be available to drive me to appointments. None of these assumptions accounted for my reality. Holidays and celebrations have become complicated in ways I didn't expect. It's not just about being alone on Christmas morning, though that's hard enough. It's about all the little celebrations and acknowledgments that happen naturally in shared households but require deliberate effort when you live alone. Birthdays are particularly difficult. When you live with someone, they remember, they acknowledge the day, maybe there's a cake or a special dinner. When you live alone, your birthday is just Tuesday unless you actively work to make it something else. I've gotten good at celebrating myself, treating myself to nice dinners, buying myself flowers, planning special activities. But there's something about externally generated celebration that can't be replicated by self-care. Someone else remembering your birthday and making an effort to acknowledge it carries emotional weight that treating yourself doesn't quite match. The same is true for smaller victories and milestones. When you get a promotion, finish a difficult project, or overcome a challenge, the celebration feels incomplete when you're the only one who knows about it right away. People often suggest that technology solves the isolation problem for older adults living alone. Video calls, social media, online communities, these tools can certainly help. But they also highlight what's missing in ways that can make the loneliness more acute. I have video calls with family members who live far away, but there's something exhausting about scheduled connection. Every conversation has to have a reason, a planned duration, a formal beginning and end. There's no casual wandering into the kitchen to share a random thought or comfortable silence while you're both reading. Social media keeps me connected to friends and family, but it also makes me hyper-aware of how much shared life I'm missing. Photos of couples traveling together, families gathering for dinner, friends meeting spontaneously for coffee, these glimpses into other people's daily connections sometimes amplify my sense of isolation rather than reducing it. The technology is helpful, but it's also a constant reminder that these connections are supplements to, not substitutes for, the natural intimacy that comes from sharing physical space with someone who cares about you. There are practical challenges to living alone after 60 that are simultaneously trivial and overwhelming. The jar you can't open becomes a genuine problem when there's no one else to ask for help. The light bulb that needs changing in a high fixture becomes a safety hazard you have to solve alone. I've developed systems for most of these things: jar openers, step stools with railings, relationships with neighbors who can help with occasional tasks. But each solution is something I had to research, purchase, and implement myself. The mental load of being responsible for every aspect of household function is cumulative and exhausting. Last month, my garage door opener broke. In the old days, that would have been a shared problem to solve together. Instead, it was a day of research, phone calls, scheduling, and dealing with repair technicians alone. Every decision was mine to make, every cost was mine to bear, every interaction was something I had to manage without support. These aren't catastrophic problems, but they're constant reminders of your singular responsibility for every aspect of your life. Let me end with the hardest truth: I'm afraid sometimes, and that fear has shaped this decade in ways I didn't expect. I'm afraid of becoming seriously ill with no one to notice the decline. I'm afraid of falling and not being found for days. I'm afraid of losing cognitive function and not having someone who loves me to intervene appropriately. I'm afraid of dying alone and not being discovered until the mail piles up. These aren't neurotic fears, they're rational concerns based on the reality of aging alone. And while I've taken steps to mitigate these risks, the underlying vulnerability remains. The fear has made me more cautious in some ways that are probably healthy, and in other ways that might be limiting my life. I don't travel as adventurously as I once did. I don't take physical risks that might have been manageable when I was younger or when someone was home to help if things went wrong. So there it is, the hard truth about living alone for a decade after 60. It's not the empowering independence story that people want to tell, but it's not a tragedy either. It's complicated, challenging, and sometimes lonely in ways that are difficult to explain to people who haven't experienced it. I want to be clear, I'm not miserable. I've found ways to create meaning, maintain connections, and take care of myself. I've grown in some ways that wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't been forced to become completely self-reliant. But I also want people to understand that living alone at our age isn't just an adventurous lifestyle choice. It comes with real challenges, legitimate fears, and practical difficulties that accumulate over time. If you're living alone, you're not weak for finding it hard sometimes. If you're worried about someone who's living alone, your concern is probably justified. If you're considering this path, go in with your eyes open about both the freedoms and the costs. The most important thing I want you to know is that acknowledging these challenges doesn't mean we're failing or complaining. It means we're being honest about our experience so we can find better ways to support each other. If this resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Are you living alone? Considering it? Worried about someone you love? Let's have an honest conversation about what this really looks like. And if you found value in this raw honesty, please subscribe to Senior Balance Hub and hit that notification bell. We're committed to telling the whole truth about aging, not just the pretty parts. At Senior Balance Hub, we believe that honest conversations about our challenges are the first step toward finding real solutions. Your experiences matter, your struggles are valid, and you're not facing them alone, even when it feels like you are. Thanks for letting me share this difficult but important story with you. I'll see you next time, where we'll continue having the conversations that matter most. Until then, take care of yourself, and if you're living alone, remember that taking care of yourself is both harder and more important than anyone who hasn't done it understands.